I remember the very first gentleman they sent to us from the union was a gentleman with obesity, hypertension and diabetes, 220/120 blood pressure, capped out on 5 meds. When he came to us, he was the very first person they referred, and they forgot to tell him one very important thing, and that was what the program was. So he showed up at the TrueNorth Health Center not knowing what was going to happen. And he looked around and he thought, oh no, he's in the wrong place. But I assured him he was in the right place, that I had his name on the list and that he had, serious health problems and he was here to get well. He assured me he was not sick. And I said, you are sick. You've got blood pressure of 220/120. You're carrying a keg around in your belly in the terms of obesity. And that he was not only sick, but that he was going to die. And his response to me was, well, aren't we all going to die? And of course, that was a valid point. We are all going to die at some point. But I explained to him that his demise was going to be much sooner rather than later if he didn't make changes. I also assured him that if he were willing to make these changes, the $880 worth of medications he spent a month could be reduced or eliminated. He explained that he didn't care about the cost of his medications because they were paid for by his insurance, not by him. At this point, I realized this was not my normal, highly motivated, self-selected patient that I'm used to dealing with. So I thought about his medical history a little bit and realized the way to motivate him might be to address one of his problems, which is very common in particularly males that are on a lot of diabetes and hypertension medication, which is impotence. And I said, if we get you off all those drugs and get you healthy, there's a chance we could do something about your little problem. At that point, he stood up and I got a little nervous because he was a big guy. And he said, well, why the hell didn't you just say so? So I realized I had his attention. But when we had taken his medical history, he told me that his diet was this picture I've got right here, except that this stuff here, if they made a mistake and put any of that lettuce on there, he would take that off and throw it away because he didn't like lettuce. But he was a triple cheeseburger guy. And so we realized before we fasted him, we would need to feed him some real food. And we did. And we got him some food from the TrueNorth Health salad bar and hot bar. And he tried to eat it, but it looked like he couldn't actually swallow the food. He was like, and I thought for a second, perhaps he had a tumor we had missed. But then I realized he just didn't like the food. And when I sat down next to him, I asked him, I said, it looks like you're having trouble with the food. He said, what food? He said, this is not food. He said, this is disgusting. And if I have to eat tasteless swill like this the rest of my life, I'd rather just die. And he told me I should go out to his truck where I would find his 12 gauge and I should bring it in. And when he's not looking, just shoot him in the head. So we checked him in. And he ended up fasting 26 days. He lost almost 50 pounds. He normalized his blood sugar, his blood pressure. We got him off his meds. And when we were done, we fed him the same kind of food that we fed him when he came in, but this time he was able to eat the food. And when I sat down next to him, I said, it looks like you're doing a little bit better with the food. He said, yep, your chef's finally getting the idea. It took me 20 minutes to convince him it was the same food that we had served him before his fast. And he absolutely couldn't believe it. He said, no, that other stuff was disgusting. He said, this was not bad. And, this is a gentleman that wouldn't have complied for a meal, let alone long enough to actually neuroadapt to a healthy diet, but he did. And I saw him 6 months later at a semi-annual blood pressure screening we were doing for the union. I asked him how he was doing. He said he was doing just fine. So the question is, okay, somebody got well, but is it safe? Can you actually fast people for up to 40 days on water only safely? And the answer is yes. And in order to really definitively answer that question, what we did is we did a study. And that study appeared in the medical literature just a few years ago. And it was called, Is Fasting Safe? A chart review of adverse events during medically supervised water-only fasting. And what we did is we took every patient every day for 5 years. And we charted all of their adverse events. And we used the common criteria, terminology criteria for adverse events from the American Cancer Society, where every patient, every day, you chart every symptom according to these standardized issues. And those are CTCAE grading system, where every symptom is given a grade 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So if you have a symptom, a mild symptom, maybe you have a headache, you might get a grade 1 for that symptom. If you have a moderate symptom, like you have nausea, you might get a grade 2. If you had a more severe symptom, like a hypertensive crisis, for example, if your systolic blood pressure on that day was over 160, you might get a category 3. If you had a potentially life-threatening event, you'd get a category 4. And if you die that day, you get a category 5 event for your death. So what we did is we took all these patients for 5 years, and we found there were a total of 5,949 adverse events. Now, most of those events were category 1 and 2 events, normal symptoms of fasting that you expect to occur. There were 310, medically significant events. There was 1 category 4 event, and there were no deaths. Now, of the 310 more medically significant adverse events, many of those were hypertensive crises. Actually, about 100 of those were hypertensive crises. And you might wonder, why would a person have a hypertensive crisis, that is, their systolic blood pressure rises over 160, if they're fasting for high blood pressure? Well, here's how it works. If you come in and your blood pressure starts at 220, like our union guys did, and the next day it goes down to, say, 210, and the next day it goes down to 200, and the next day it's down to 190, and the next day it's down to 185, and the next day it's down to 175. Well, every one of those days is an adverse event and a reportable event. See, because it's an arbitrary standard. Anytime there's a blood pressure, for whatever reason, is over 160, that's reportable. And so it turns out most of our reportable events in this category 3 were people that were having problems that were in the process of resolving, but still qualified as adverse events. There was 1 category 4 event. That was a hyponatremic event. That is, a person's blood sodium level went too low. Because we monitored that, we caught it, easily corrected it. But it's the kind of thing, if you weren't monitoring it, it could have become serious or even life-threatening. And there were no deaths during fasting. So the conclusion of this study was that the majority of adverse events are mild to moderate. They're known to occur during fasting. They're expected. There was a slight correlation between age and the number of adverse events, but not so much severity, which was important because up until this time, anybody that was, say, 65 and older was considered too old to be able to participate in a study of fasting. Whereas now we know that even if the person's older, if they're 65, 70, 75, that they're not more likely to have serious adverse events than the younger person, and therefore there's no reason to exclude them from this process. And this safety study was important because not only did it allow us to do research that could be published on fasting, but allows any researchers using this protocol to conduct fasting research. And in fact, it's interesting because Walter Longo, who wrote a book on fasting, talks about intermittent fasting mostly and cautioned people about long-term fasting because of its danger. The caveat, he said, was if it was done at the TrueNorth Health Center. Now, I evaluate people's, particularly researchers' intelligence based on how much they agree with me. So that makes Dr. Longo a genius. And so the bottom line is, if this protocol is used, other people, in addition to us, can expect to be able to get IRBs or Human Subjects Committee to approve fasting based on this fasting safety study.